Daniel Mercer had spent most of his career chasing stories that nobody else cared about. Forgotten crimes, unsolved disappearances, small mysteries buried beneath decades of dust. Most of them ended the same way, a dead end. That was exactly what he expected when he walked into the town archive on a cold autumn morning. The archive sat inside an aging stone building near the center of town. Few people visited anymore. The shelves were packed with old newspapers, police reports, and photographs that had not been touched in years. Daniel was researching a feature about local cold cases. Nothing special. Just another article for the newspaper. At least that was the plan. An elderly archivist led him toward a section containing missing person records. The folders were arranged by year. Daniel slowly scanned the labels: 1979, 1980, 1981, 1982. Then he stopped. 1983. For some reason, the folder looked newer than the others, as if someone had handled it recently. Daniel pulled it from the shelf. A thin layer of dust fell onto the table. He opened the file. The name on the first page read Eleanor Hart. Missing, July 18, 1983, age 24. The report was brief. Eleanor had disappeared without warning. No body had ever been found. No suspect had ever been identified. No explanation had ever been discovered. The investigation eventually stalled. The case remained unsolved for more than 4 decades. Daniel continued reading. Witness statements, police notes, search maps, old newspaper clippings. Then he reached a photograph attached to the file. He paused. The woman in the picture had dark hair and calm eyes. She stood outside a small cafe. Nothing unusual about the image, yet something about her face felt strangely familiar. Daniel stared for several seconds. Then he shrugged. Maybe he had seen a similar face somewhere before. He continued, searching through the archive for several hours. As evening approached, he packed his notes and prepared to leave. Before heading home, he stopped by the newspaper office. The editor wanted photographs from the town festival that had taken place the previous day. Daniel volunteered to sort through them. The photographer had captured hundreds of images: crowds, food stalls, street performers, families. Nothing particularly interesting. Daniel clicked through them one after another. Then his hand froze. He stared at the screen. His heartbeat quickened. He immediately opened another window. The missing person file, Eleanor Hart's photograph, then the festival photograph, back and forth, again. The same face, the same eyes, the same nose, the same expression. It was impossible. The woman standing among yesterday's festival crowd looked exactly like Eleanor Hart. Not similar, not related, not a descendant, exactly the same. Daniel zoomed in. Every detail matched. The woman appeared no older than 24, the same age she had been when she vanished. His stomach tightened. He checked the image date, yesterday. The metadata confirmed it. The photograph had been taken less than 24 hours earlier. Daniel leaned back in his chair. There had to be an explanation, a coincidence, a lookalike, a mistake. Yet the more he compared the images, the less convincing those explanations became. The resemblance was perfect. He printed both photographs, placing them side by side. The difference between them was 43 years, yet there was no visible difference at all. Outside the office window, darkness settled over the town. The streets became quiet. Daniel sat alone beneath the fluorescent lights, unable to look away. His original article suddenly felt unimportant. Something else had happened here. Something nobody had explained. Something connected to a woman who had vanished in 1983. And somehow appeared again yesterday. Daniel gathered the photographs, slipped them into his bag, and made a decision. Tomorrow he would reopen the Eleanor Hart case, no matter where it led, because for the first time in years, he was looking at a mystery that seemed impossible, and impossible mysteries were the ones he could never ignore. Daniel barely slept. The 2 photographs remained spread across his kitchen table all night. Every time he looked at them, he noticed another matching detail. The shape of Eleanor's eyebrows, the small mark near her left eye, the curve of her smile. Nothing was different. 43 years should have changed everything. Yet the woman in the festival photograph looked untouched by time. Early the next morning, Daniel returned to the archive. The elderly archivist looked surprised to see him again. "Back already?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "I need everything connected to Eleanor Hart." The woman hesitated. She slowly disappeared into a storage room. Several minutes later, she returned carrying 3 additional boxes. Daniel spent hours digging through their contents. Most of the records contained familiar information: witness statements, search reports, newspaper articles, public appeals. But one thing caught his attention. Nearly every article described Eleanor in exactly the same way: kind, intelligent, well-liked, someone with no enemies, someone who had no reason to disappear. The more Daniel read, the stranger the case became. Around noon, he left the archive and began visiting longtime residents. The first person he interviewed was a retired baker named Harold Benson. Harold had lived in town his entire life. When Daniel showed him Eleanor's photograph, the old man's face immediately changed. He recognized her. Everyone from that generation did. "Poor girl," Harold said quietly. "People searched for months." "What happened to her?" Daniel asked. Harold shook his head. "No one ever knew." Daniel placed the newer festival photograph beside the older one. Harold stared. His eyes widened. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. "Where did you get this?" "It was taken yesterday." The old baker looked genuinely frightened. "That's not possible." Daniel remained silent. Harold leaned closer. "The face is identical." "That's what I thought." The old man suddenly glanced toward the window, as if afraid someone might be listening. Then he lowered his voice. "You aren't the first person to ask questions." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean?" Harold hesitated. "There were others over the years. Reporters? Researchers. What happened to them?" The baker looked uncomfortable. "Most gave up." "Most?" Harold avoided eye contact. "I don't know." The answer sounded incomplete. Daniel thanked him and continued his investigation. Throughout the afternoon, he spoke with more residents. Each conversation followed a similar pattern. Everyone remembered Eleanor. Everyone agreed she had vanished. And everyone reacted with shock when shown the newer photograph. But something else emerged. A pattern. Several witnesses from the original case had died over the years. That alone was not unusual. 43 years was a long time. People aged. People passed away. Yet Daniel noticed something strange. Many deaths seemed oddly connected. One witness died shortly after claiming he had seen something important. Another suffered a fatal accident. A third disappeared from town entirely. The details were vague, scattered, incomplete. Yet the pattern disturbed him. Late in the afternoon, Daniel visited the local cemetery. Rows of weathered headstones stretched across the hillside. Several names matched people listed in Eleanor's case file. Witnesses, investigators, individuals connected to the disappearance. Most had taken secrets with them. Daniel stood quietly among the graves. The wind moved through the trees. For a moment, the entire town felt different. Not peaceful, not welcoming, hidden. As though something had been buried beneath decades of silence. Something nobody wanted uncovered. As evening approached, Daniel headed toward the town library. He requested newspaper editions from the summer of 1983. Hour after hour, he examined yellowed pages. Most articles focused on the search effort, volunteers, police operations, public concern. Then he found something unusual, a small article published 2 weeks before Eleanor vanished. The headline was simple. "Local woman claims she is being followed." Daniel read every word. The article mentioned Eleanor by name. According to the report, she had told friends someone was watching her. She believed she was being followed during her evening walks. Police investigated but found no evidence. The complaint was dismissed. Daniel felt a chill. This information had barely appeared in later reports, almost as if it had been forgotten or intentionally ignored. He photocopied the article, then continued searching. A second detail emerged. Several pages were missing from the newspaper archive, not damaged, removed. Entire sections had vanished. Daniel checked neighboring editions. The same thing. Specific pages were gone. Someone had deliberately taken them. His pulse quickened. Missing records, missing witnesses, missing information. The deeper he looked, the less accidental everything seemed. Night had fallen by the time he left the library. The streets were quiet. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. As Daniel walked toward his car, he noticed someone standing across the road. A woman. Watching him, he froze. The figure stood beneath a street lamp. Dark hair, pale face, motionless. Daniel's heart pounded. For a brief second, she looked exactly like Eleanor Hart. Then a passing bus blocked his view. Only for a moment. When it moved on, the woman was gone. The sidewalk stood empty. Daniel rushed across the street. There was nobody there. No footsteps, no sound, nothing. Only the cold night air. He slowly turned in a circle. The town seemed completely deserted. Yet he couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching him. The same feeling Eleanor had described 43 years earlier. And for the first time since beginning the investigation, Daniel realized something unsettling. He was no longer just studying the mystery. He might already be part of it. Daniel arrived at the newspaper office before sunrise. The encounter from the previous night stayed in his mind. Maybe the woman beneath the street lamp had been a coincidence. Maybe exhaustion was affecting his judgment. But deep down, he knew what he had seen. The face had looked exactly like Eleanor Hart, and that thought refused to leave him. He placed every document he had collected across his desk. Photographs, witness statements, old newspaper articles, police reports. If he wanted answers, he needed to understand Eleanor's final day. Hour by hour, step by step, he began building a timeline. July 18, 1983, the last day Eleanor Hart was officially seen. According to records, her morning appeared completely normal. She visited a local bakery, stopped at the post office, purchased groceries. Several people confirmed seeing her. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Then the timeline became strange. Around noon, Eleanor reportedly received a phone call. No record existed of who called. No notes mentioned the conversation. Yet multiple witnesses remembered that she appeared shaken afterward. One friend described her as nervous. Another said she looked frightened. A third claimed Eleanor repeatedly checked over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. Daniel highlighted every reference. The pattern was obvious. Something had happened that day. Something important, and nobody had ever identified what it was. As he continued reading, another detail emerged. At approximately 4 in the afternoon, Eleanor visited the town library. She requested historical records connected to the old railway line outside town. Daniel frowned. The railway line appeared again. The same abandoned railway station mentioned in several reports. The same location where Eleanor was supposedly last seen. He made a note. By evening, Eleanor had left town center and headed toward the station. That was the final confirmed sighting. After that, she vanished. No witnesses, no evidence, no explanation. Daniel leaned back in his chair. The abandoned station clearly mattered. It wasn't just the location of her disappearance. It was connected to whatever she had been investigating beforehand. He needed to see it for himself. The station sat several miles outside town. The road leading there was narrow and rarely used. Trees crowded both sides of the route. Their branches formed a dark tunnel overhead. As Daniel drove, the town gradually disappeared behind him. The landscape felt isolated, forgotten, exactly the kind of place where secrets could remain hidden for decades. Eventually, he reached the old railway station. The building looked abandoned, broken windows, faded signs, rust covering nearly every metal surface. Nature had begun reclaiming the structure. Tall grass surrounded the tracks. Weeds pushed through cracks in the concrete. The station looked frozen in time. Daniel parked nearby and approached on foot. The silence was unsettling. No traffic, no voices, only wind moving through the trees. Inside, the station appeared even older. Dust covered every surface. Pieces of plaster littered the floor. A faded clock still hung above the waiting area. Its hands permanently stopped at 11:47. Daniel began exploring. Most rooms contained nothing useful. Empty offices, storage closets, forgotten equipment. Then he entered what had once been the station master's office. Something immediately caught his attention. A section of floorboards looked newer than the rest. Not new, just newer, as if repairs had been made decades ago. Daniel knelt beside them. The wood showed subtle differences, different nails, different wear patterns. Someone had replaced these boards long ago. His pulse quickened. He photographed the area, then carefully examined the surrounding room. Nothing else seemed unusual, yet the repaired floor bothered him. Why replace a small section of flooring in an abandoned office? The question remained in his mind as he continued searching. Hours passed. Most of the building revealed nothing. Finally, as sunlight began fading, Daniel noticed something hidden behind a rusted filing cabinet. A small object lay beneath years of dust. He pulled it free, a leather notebook. His heart raced. The cover was worn, the pages yellowed with age. Carefully, he opened it. The first page contained a name, Eleanor Hart. Daniel stared. The notebook belonged to her. There was no doubt. His hands trembled as he turned the next page. Most entries appeared ordinary, personal thoughts, daily observations, plans and reminders. Then the tone changed. The later entries were very different. One passage immediately caught his eye. I know someone is following me. Daniel froze. He continued reading. The same man appears everywhere. The cafe, the library, the station. Every time I turn around, he is there. Another entry. I think he wants me to find something. Daniel frowned. That made no sense. The next page contained another unsettling sentence. He says the truth has been hidden for years. Daniel turned pages faster. The handwriting became increasingly anxious. The entries grew shorter, more frantic. Then he reached the final completed page. The date was July 18, 1983, the day Eleanor disappeared. The final words read, "He told me to meet him at the station tonight. If what he says is true, everything will change." The entry ended there. No further pages contained writing. Nothing after that night. Nothing after the moment Eleanor vanished. Daniel slowly lowered the notebook. The room suddenly felt colder. Someone had been meeting Eleanor, someone connected to the station, someone who claimed to know a hidden truth. Yet police records barely mentioned any of it. How could such important information have remained hidden for 43 years? A distant sound interrupted his thoughts. A metallic noise, somewhere inside the station. Daniel immediately looked up. The building was supposed to be empty. The sound came again, a slow scrape of metal against concrete. His heartbeat accelerated. "Hello," he called. No answer. Silence returned. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then another noise echoed through the corridor outside. A footstep. Daniel stood motionless, listening. Someone was inside the station with him. And judging by the sound, they were getting closer. Daniel remained perfectly still. The sound echoed through the abandoned station once more. A slow footstep. Then another. Someone was definitely inside the building. The corridor outside the office lay hidden in darkness. Daniel's pulse hammered in his ears. He carefully picked up the notebook and slipped it into his bag. The footsteps stopped. Silence filled the station. For several long seconds, nothing moved. Then a shadow briefly crossed the doorway. Daniel immediately stepped forward. "Who's there?" No answer. He rushed into the corridor. Empty. The hallway stretched in both directions. No sign of anyone. Yet he had clearly heard movement. He checked every nearby room. Nothing. Only dust and silence. Eventually, he reached the station platform. The evening sun had nearly disappeared. Long shadows covered the abandoned tracks. Daniel scanned the area. Then he froze. A figure stood at the far end of the platform. A woman, motionless, watching him. His breath caught. Even from a distance, he recognized her. The dark hair, the pale face, the exact appearance from the photograph. Eleanor Hart, or someone who looked exactly like her. The woman turned, then began walking away. Daniel reacted instantly. "Wait!" She continued moving. Daniel hurried after her. The platform ended near a narrow path leading into the trees. For a moment, he thought he would lose sight of her. Then he caught another glimpse between the branches. Still moving. Still leading him farther away from the station. Daniel followed. The forest grew darker with every step. The path twisted through dense trees. Eventually, he emerged onto a quiet road. The woman stood beside a parked car. For the first time, Daniel saw her clearly. His heart nearly stopped. She looked exactly like Eleanor's photograph. Not older, not younger, exactly the same. The woman stared at him. Confusion filled her eyes, as if she didn't understand why he was there. Daniel slowly approached. "I'm not going to hurt you." The woman said nothing. Her gaze shifted toward the road, then back to Daniel. "You know my name," she said quietly. Daniel froze. Her voice sounded calm, almost cautious. "Yes," he replied. The woman looked troubled. How? Daniel hesitated. How could he explain? How could he tell her that she had been missing for 43 years? Before he could answer, headlights suddenly appeared in the distance. A vehicle approached along the road. The woman's expression immediately changed. Fear, pure fear. She stepped backward. "No." The word escaped her lips like a warning. The approaching vehicle drew closer. Daniel turned briefly toward it. Only for a second. When he looked back, the woman was running. She disappeared into the trees. "Eleanor!" Daniel chased after her. Branches scraped against his jacket. Leaves crunched beneath his feet. But within moments, she was gone, completely gone. The forest stood silent once again. Daniel searched for nearly half an hour. Nothing. No footprints. No movement. No sign she had ever been there. Eventually, darkness forced him to stop. Frustrated and exhausted, he returned to town. The encounter raised more questions than answers. She existed. He knew that now. She was real, not a ghost, not an illusion. And somehow she knew he recognized her. The following morning, Daniel focused on another lead, the guest house. While reviewing security footage from streets near the festival grounds, he had noticed Eleanor entering an old guest house shortly after the festival ended. If she had stayed there, someone must have seen her. The building stood near the edge of town, a small place that mostly served travelers. Daniel arrived shortly after breakfast. The owner greeted him politely, an elderly woman named Margaret. When Daniel showed her Eleanor's photograph, she frowned. "I've never seen her." Daniel produced a still image from the security footage. Margaret studied it. Her expression changed. For a brief moment she looked nervous. Then she shook her head. "No, you're sure?" "Absolutely." Daniel wasn't convinced. The reaction had been too quick, too defensive. After leaving the front desk, he quietly examined the guest house records. Most guest names appeared ordinary, but one entry stood out. Room 7. No name, no identification, no address. The room had supposedly been vacant, yet records showed it had been accessed several times during the previous week. Daniel requested to see the room. Margaret reluctantly agreed. Room 7 sat at the end of a narrow hallway. The moment Daniel entered, he sensed something unusual. The room appeared clean. Too clean, as if someone had recently removed every trace of its occupant. He carefully inspected the space. Nothing. No luggage. No documents. No personal belongings. Then he noticed something near the window. A single object hidden beneath a radiator, a folded piece of paper. Daniel picked it up. His stomach tightened. It was a railway ticket. Old, very old. The date printed on it was clear. July 18, 1983. The exact day Eleanor disappeared. Daniel stared at the ticket. The paper should not have existed here. Not after 4 decades. Yet it looked surprisingly well preserved, as though it had only recently been placed there. He turned it over. Words had been written on the back. Only 4 words. "Meet me again tonight." Daniel felt a chill run through him. Someone had left the message. Someone connected to Eleanor. Someone who wanted her at the station. And now, after 43 years, that same mystery was beginning to move again. As Daniel slipped the ticket into his pocket, he noticed something outside the window. Across the street, standing perfectly still, the same woman, watching the guest house, watching him. This time she didn't run. This time she simply waited. And for the first time, Daniel realized she might be trying to tell him something. Daniel immediately left room 7. By the time he reached the front entrance of the guest house, the woman across the street was already walking away. Not running, walking, almost as if she wanted him to follow. Daniel crossed the road. The woman turned a corner. He hurried after her. For several minutes he kept her in sight. She moved through the older section of town, where narrow streets twisted between stone buildings. Finally, she entered a small public garden. The place was empty, quiet, hidden from the main roads. When Daniel arrived, she was standing beside an old fountain. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The woman studied him carefully. "You've been looking for me," Daniel nodded. "Are you Eleanor Hart?" She hesitated. The question seemed to confuse her. "Yes." Daniel felt a chill. Hearing the answer directly was somehow more shocking than seeing her. "You know who you are?" "Of course. What year do you think this is?" The woman frowned. 1983. Daniel's heart sank. The answer was exactly what he feared. "Eleanor," he spoke carefully. "It's not 1983. She stared at him, then laughed nervously, as if the statement was absurd. "What are you talking about?" "It's 2026. The color drained from her face. For several seconds she simply stood there. Then she shook her head. "No, it's true. No, Eleanor, no." Fear appeared in her eyes. Real fear. The kind that comes when reality suddenly stops making sense. She stepped backward, breathing faster. "This isn't funny. I'm not joking." Eleanor looked around the garden, the buildings, the cars, the people walking in the distance, as if she were seeing everything for the first time. Daniel slowly removed the old photograph from his bag, the missing person photograph. He handed it to her. Eleanor stared at the image, then at the date beneath it, July 1983. Her hands began trembling. "I remember this picture." Daniel nodded. "It was taken weeks before you disappeared." The silence that followed felt endless. Finally, Eleanor whispered, "I disappeared?" Daniel didn't know how to answer, because from her perspective, she hadn't disappeared at all. For her, only a short time seemed to have passed. Yet for everyone else, 43 years had vanished. Eventually, Eleanor sat on a nearby bench, trying to process everything. Daniel joined her. Over the next hour, she told him everything she remembered. Most details matched the police reports. The phone call, the feeling of being watched, the mysterious man, the railway station. But then she revealed something new, something never mentioned in any report. "The man wasn't threatening me." Daniel looked up. "What do you mean?" "He was trying to warn me." "About what?" Eleanor hesitated, then lowered her voice. "There were people hiding something." Daniel immediately leaned forward. "What kind of people?" "Important people. Important how?" "They controlled things." The answer sent a chill through him, because over the past few days, he had begun suspecting exactly that. Eleanor continued. "I found documents." "What documents?" "I don't know exactly. It was years ago." Then she corrected herself. "No, hours ago." The statement hung awkwardly between them. For Eleanor, the disappearance still felt recent. She continued speaking. "The documents showed money being moved, illegal money. Names were involved, influential names." Daniel's pulse quickened. "What happened after that?" "I confronted someone." "Who?" "I never learned his real name." "The man at the station?" Eleanor nodded. "He said people were afraid of what I found." Daniel sat quietly. Everything was starting to connect. The missing newspaper pages, the missing records, the nervous reactions, the witnesses who vanished. Someone had spent decades protecting a secret Eleanor discovered before she disappeared. That evening, Daniel visited the town records office. If Eleanor was right, evidence might still exist. The building closed shortly before sunset. A clerk reluctantly allowed him limited access. For hours, Daniel searched financial records from the early 1980s. Most appeared normal. Then he found something strange. Several files had been removed. Entire years of documents were missing. Not misplaced, removed deliberately. The pattern repeated again and again. Records connected to a small development project near the railway line had vanished. Daniel copied everything he could find. When he finally left, darkness had settled over town. As he walked toward his car, he noticed someone standing near the parking lot entrance. An elderly man. Watching him, the stranger looked familiar. Daniel suddenly realized why. He had seen the man's face before. Inside Eleanor's case file, one of the original investigators. Official records listed him as retired. Yet here he was, watching, waiting. The man slowly approached. His expression remained serious. "You should stop digging." Daniel froze. The warning was calm, almost polite, which somehow made it more unsettling. "Why?" The old man glanced around the empty parking lot, then lowered his voice. "Because some secrets were buried for a reason." Daniel felt a chill. What happened to Eleanor Hart? For several seconds, the man remained silent. Then he answered, "The wrong question." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" The man looked directly into his eyes. "The real question is why someone is trying so hard to make sure nobody learns the truth." Before Daniel could respond, the old investigator turned and walked away into the darkness, leaving Daniel alone, and more convinced than ever that the entire town had spent 43 years hiding something far bigger than a simple disappearance. Daniel barely slept that night. The warning from the retired investigator echoed in his mind. Some secrets were buried for a reason. The words felt less like advice and more like a confession. By sunrise, Daniel had made a decision. Everything pointed back to the same place. The abandoned railway station, Eleanor's last known destination. The location mentioned in her notebook. The place connected to missing records, hidden documents, and unanswered questions. If the truth existed anywhere, it was there. Shortly after breakfast, Daniel met Eleanor at a quiet cafe outside town. She looked exhausted. Every hour brought another reminder that the world she remembered no longer existed. New technology, new buildings, new faces, an entire lifetime had passed without her. Yet one thing remained unchanged: her determination. When Daniel explained his plan, she agreed immediately. Together they drove toward the abandoned railway line. Clouds covered the sky. The forest seemed darker than before. The station emerged from the trees like a forgotten monument, silent, empty, waiting. Eleanor stared at the building. "I've been here before." Daniel nodded. "The night you disappeared." She looked toward the platform. A strange expression crossed her face. Fragments of memory seemed to be returning. "I remember meeting someone. The man who contacted you." "What happened?" Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to focus. "I remember walking inside. I remember being scared." Then she shook her head. "After that, everything becomes unclear." Daniel led her into the station. Dust covered the floor. Broken glass reflected faint daylight. Nothing appeared different, until they reached the station master's office, the room containing the repaired floorboards. The moment Eleanor stepped inside, she froze. Her face lost color. "What is it?" Daniel asked. She pointed toward the floor. "There." Daniel followed her gaze. The repaired section. The exact area that had seemed unusual during his previous visit. Without hesitation, Eleanor knelt beside it. "I remember this." Daniel's pulse quickened. "You do?" She nodded slowly. There was something underneath. The words sent a chill through him. Together they examined the floor. The boards looked old but removable. After several minutes of effort, they managed to lift one corner. A cloud of dust filled the air. Then a hidden space appeared beneath. Daniel stared. A compartment, deliberately concealed. For decades, inside lay several objects: old documents, photographs, a leather folder, and a metal box. Daniel carefully removed everything. The documents appeared remarkably preserved, protected from moisture by the compartment. As he examined them, his heart began racing. Financial records, property transfers, secret agreements, names, dozens of names. Some belonged to people long dead. Others belonged to families that still held influence in town. The records revealed illegal land deals connected to the railway development project from the early 1980s. Millions had disappeared. Ownership had been falsified. Public funds had been redirected. Entire sections of official history had been fabricated. Eleanor had been telling the truth. She had uncovered corruption, not rumors, proof. Daniel opened the metal box. Inside were photographs. Most showed meetings between local officials and businessmen. Then he found one image that made him stop breathing. A photograph taken inside the station. Dated July 18, 1983. The night Eleanor vanished. The image showed Eleanor standing beside an older man. The same mysterious man from her notebook. Written on the back were 4 words: "He knows the truth." Daniel turned the photograph over again. There was something familiar about the man's face. Very familiar. Then realization struck. The retired investigator. The man who warned him. Older now, but unmistakably the same person. Daniel stared at the image in disbelief. The investigator hadn't merely worked the case. He had been involved from the beginning. Eleanor noticed his expression. "What is it?" Daniel handed her the photograph. The moment she saw it, her eyes widened. "That's him, the man from the station." "Yes." Daniel felt his stomach tighten. For 43 years the man had remained in town, watching, waiting, keeping silent. Yet another mystery remained. If Eleanor uncovered corruption, why had she disappeared? The documents explained motive, but not the disappearance itself. Then Eleanor noticed something inside the compartment. A journal, different from the notebook Daniel had already found. This one belonged to the mysterious man. The pages were filled with handwritten entries. Daniel turned directly to the final section. July 18, 1983. His eyes scanned the words. Then he froze. Every muscle in his body became rigid. The final entry read, "Tonight I showed Eleanor what lies beyond the tunnel. She deserves the truth. If she enters, she may never return. Time does not move there as it does here." Silence filled the room. Daniel read the sentence again and again, certain he had misunderstood, but the words never changed. Eleanor stared at the page. Confusion filled her face. "What tunnel?" Daniel looked up. What tunnel? Neither of them had seen any tunnel. Not in the station, not in the records, not anywhere. Yet according to the journal, it was important enough to explain everything. A distant sound suddenly echoed through the building. Both of them looked up. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper inside the station. Daniel and Eleanor exchanged a glance. Someone else was here, and this time they both knew exactly who it might be. The man from the photograph, the man who knew the truth, the man who had waited 43 years. The footsteps echoed through the station, slow, steady, unhurried. Daniel and Eleanor stood motionless beside the hidden compartment. Neither spoke. The sound grew closer, one step at a time. Then a figure appeared in the doorway, an elderly man, grey hair, weathered face, the retired investigator, the same man from the photograph, the same man Eleanor had met on the night she disappeared. For several seconds, nobody moved. The old man looked at Eleanor. Shock appeared in his eyes. Not surprise, not fear. Shock, as if he had never truly expected to see her again. Eleanor, his voice barely rose above a whisper. Eleanor stared back. You! The man slowly entered the room. Daniel immediately stepped between them. Start talking, the investigator sighed. 43 years of exhaustion seemed to settle onto his shoulders. I knew this day would come. Daniel's patience disappeared. What happened to her? The old man remained silent. What happened at this station? Still silence. Finally, Eleanor spoke. You told me to come here. The man lowered his eyes. Yes. Why? His answer came slowly. Because I thought you deserved the truth. The truth about what? The investigator looked around the abandoned office, then toward the far end of the station, the tunnel. The word hung in the air. Daniel crossed his arms. Show us. For a moment the man hesitated, then he nodded. Without another word he led them through the station, past broken waiting rooms, past rusted storage areas, past sections Daniel had already searched. Eventually they reached a locked metal door hidden behind old equipment. Daniel had never noticed it before. The investigator removed a key from his pocket, a key he had apparently carried for decades. The lock clicked open. The heavy door slowly swung inward. Darkness waited beyond. A narrow passage extended underground. Cold air drifted upward. Eleanor stared into the darkness. I remember this. The investigator nodded. You walked through here before. Daniel switched on a flashlight. The beam revealed old brick walls stretching deep beneath the station. The tunnel appeared far older than the railway itself. Almost ancient. The three of them began walking. The deeper they went, the quieter everything became. No wind, no birds, no sounds from the outside world. Only footsteps. And silence. After several minutes, the tunnel widened into a large underground chamber. Daniel stopped. His flashlight swept across the room. What he saw made no sense. The chamber contained railway tracks, but not ordinary tracks. These tracks simply ended in empty space. No wall, no exit. Nothing. Just a section where reality itself seemed distorted. The air shimmered faintly, like heat rising from pavement. Daniel stared. What is that? The investigator's face became pale. For years, I'd tried convincing myself it wasn't real. Eleanor looked equally confused. The night I disappeared. The old man nodded. You entered. Daniel turned toward him.
Entered what?
The investigator took a deep breath, then finally revealed the truth. 43 years ago, workers discovered this chamber while expanding the railway. They kept it secret. Only a few people knew. Daniel listened carefully. The tunnel shouldn't exist. Neither should what lies at the end of it. The shimmering distortion seemed to pulse softly. Almost alive, the old man continued. I was young then. I investigated strange reports, people claiming they lost hours, sometimes days, sometimes more. Daniel felt a chill. Eleanor stared at the distortion. Her expression slowly changed. Fragments of memory returning. I remember, the investigator nodded sadly. You walked toward it. Eleanor closed her eyes. I thought it was light. You told me it would reveal everything. I know. What happened after that? The old man's voice became heavy. You stepped through. Silence filled the chamber. Daniel looked at Eleanor, then back at the investigator. You mean she vanished inside that thing? Yes. Daniel struggled to process the answer. It sounded impossible. Yet nothing about this case had been normal. The investigator continued. I tried reaching you. I followed. You were gone. Completely gone. Eleanor stared at the distortion. And now I'm back. The man nodded. Apparently. Daniel looked at the shimmering space. If she spent 43 years there? Eleanor interrupted quietly. It didn't feel like 43 years. The investigator nodded. Because time doesn't move normally beyond that threshold. Daniel remembered the journal entry. Time does not move there as it does here. Now the words finally made sense, at least partly. But another question remained. Perhaps the most important question of all. If this place exists, Daniel asked, why was everything covered up? The investigator's expression darkened. Because powerful people learned about it. Daniel immediately understood. The corruption, the missing records, the missing documents, the lies. The cover-up wasn't only about money, it was about the tunnel, about something impossible hidden beneath the town. The old man lowered his voice. When Eleanor disappeared, they became terrified. Terrified someone would discover this place. So they buried everything, every record, every witness, every piece of evidence. Daniel felt anger rising. Entire lives had been destroyed to protect a secret. Families had suffered for decades, and the truth had been hidden underground. Then suddenly a sound echoed through the chamber. Not footsteps, not voices, something else. A low vibration. The shimmering distortion began moving, slowly at first, then faster. The chamber itself seemed to tremble. Eleanor stepped backward. The investigator's face turned white. No, Daniel looked at him. What is it? The old man stared at the distortion, pure fear filling his eyes. It never did that before. The vibration intensified. The air became colder, far colder. Then, deep within the shimmering space, a shape appeared. A human silhouette. Standing motionless on the other side, watching them. The silhouette stood motionless beyond the shimmering barrier, watching, waiting. None of them spoke. The chamber had become completely silent. Even the vibration seemed to pause. Daniel tightened his grip on the flashlight. The figure looked human, but something felt wrong. The shape lacked detail. Its edges blurred constantly, as if it wasn't fully part of the world around them. Eleanor stared. A strange expression appeared on her face. Recognition. I know that person. Daniel looked at her. What? The silhouette remained still. Eleanor took a cautious step forward. I've seen them before. The investigator immediately grabbed her arm. Don't! His voice was sharp, fearful. Eleanor stopped. The silhouette slowly raised one hand. Then, without warning, the distortion collapsed inward. The figure vanished. The chamber returned to silence. The vibration ended. Everything became still again. Daniel looked toward the investigator. What was that? The old man shook his head. I don't know. For the first time, he sounded completely honest and completely afraid. The three of them left the underground chamber and returned to the station office. No one spoke during the walk back. Each was lost in their own thoughts. Once inside, Eleanor sat beside a dusty window. She looked exhausted, as if memories were finally beginning to return. Daniel sat across from her. Tell me everything you remember. Eleanor stared at the floor. For several moments she remained silent. Then she began speaking. Slowly, carefully. I remember stepping into the light. Daniel listened. After that, she paused. I wasn't at the station anymore. Where were you? I don't know. The answer sounded frustrating, yet genuine. I remember a place, a strange place. There were buildings, tracks, roads, but everything felt empty. Daniel frowned. Empty? No people, no animals, nothing. The description sent a chill through him, Eleanor continued. It looked like our world, but different, as if it had been abandoned. The investigator listened quietly. His face grew paler with every sentence. Daniel noticed. You know something? The old man hesitated, then nodded. A little. Daniel waited. The investigator finally spoke. Years ago, before Eleanor disappeared, there were other reports. What kind of reports? People who entered the tunnel. Daniel's eyes widened. There were others? The man nodded. Very few. Most were never officially recorded. Some returned, and the investigator swallowed. They described places similar to what Eleanor just described. Daniel felt a chill. The chamber, the distortion, the missing years. Everything was becoming more complicated. Eleanor continued her story. I wandered for what felt like days, maybe weeks. I can't be sure. There was no way to measure time. Daniel leaned forward. Did you see anyone? Eleanor nodded slowly. Eventually, the room became silent. Who? Her answer came quietly. Myself. Daniel froze. The investigator's expression changed immediately. Eleanor continued. I saw someone who looked exactly like me. The same face, the same clothes, the same age. Daniel stared. You saw another version of yourself? I think so. The words sounded impossible. Yet, after everything they had discovered, impossible no longer meant impossible. Eleanor looked toward the window. I followed her. Every time I got close, she disappeared. Then I would see her somewhere else. Daniel struggled to process what he was hearing. The investigator looked deeply unsettled. Almost as if Eleanor had confirmed a fear he'd carried for decades. What happened next? Daniel asked. I found another railway station. Daniel immediately looked up. Another station. The railway again. Eleanor nodded. It looked almost identical. The same platform, the same clock, the same signs, but nobody was there. She paused, then whispered, "That's where I found the way back." Daniel sat silently. Everything finally began fitting together. Eleanor hadn't been kidnapped. She hadn't run away. She hadn't died. She had become trapped somewhere beyond the tunnel, somewhere where time moved differently. Somewhere connected to the strange chamber beneath the station, and somehow she had found her way home, 43 years later. The investigator slowly stood. I spent decades trying to understand it. Daniel looked at him. Did you ever learn what the place is? The old man shook his head. No, only that it exists, and that some people wanted to use it. The statement immediately caught Daniel's attention. Use it? The investigator nodded. The corruption Eleanor discovered wasn't only about money. Daniel's pulse quickened. What do you mean? The old man looked toward the hidden tunnel entrance, then back toward them. The people behind the cover-up believed the tunnel could give them power. Silence filled the room. They funded secret research. They moved money. They buried evidence. They wanted control. Daniel suddenly understood why records had vanished, why witnesses disappeared, why entire investigations had been manipulated. The tunnel itself had been the real secret all along. The corruption merely helped hide it. Then a new realization struck him. If influential people had spent decades protecting the tunnel, they would never allow the truth to become public. As if responding to that thought, a loud crash echoed from outside the station. All three jumped. Another crash followed, metal striking metal. Daniel rushed to the nearest window. His blood ran cold. 3 vehicles had arrived outside, dark vehicles, unmarked. Several people stepped out, moving toward the station, purposefully. The investigator's face turned pale. They found us. Daniel turned sharply. Who? The old man's answer came immediately. The people who have been protecting this secret for 43 years. The station doors slammed shut somewhere below. Footsteps echoed through the building, and for the first time, Daniel realized the truth was no longer hidden, which meant it had become dangerous. The footsteps echoed through the station, heavy, purposeful, getting closer. Daniel stepped away from the window. Below them, doors opened and closed. Voices carried through the abandoned building. The people who had arrived knew exactly where they were going. The investigator's face had become completely pale. They've never come this openly before. Daniel looked at him. Who are they? The old man hesitated, then answered, The descendants. Descendants of who? The people who started the cover-up. Silence filled the room. For decades, the original conspirators had died, but their families had inherited the secret, and apparently they were still protecting it. Eleanor stood. What do they want? The investigator looked toward the hidden tunnel. You! The answer landed heavily. Daniel frowned. Eleanor, the old man nodded. She's proof the tunnel exists. If she speaks publicly, everything falls apart. A loud bang echoed somewhere below. One of the station doors had been forced open. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Daniel's mind raced. They needed evidence. Not theories, not stories. Evidence nobody could deny. Then he remembered the hidden compartment. The documents, the photographs, the journal. Enough material to expose the corruption. But would it be enough to expose the tunnel? Probably not. The tunnel sounded impossible. Without proof, most people would dismiss it. Daniel looked at Eleanor, then at the investigator. There has to be more. The old man remained silent. Daniel understood immediately. There was something he hadn't revealed. What are you hiding? The investigator closed his eyes. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he sighed. There is one thing. Another crash echoed below. Time was running out. What thing? The old man reached into his jacket, slowly, carefully, then removed a small envelope. The paper looked ancient, yellowed with age. Daniel took it. Inside was a photograph. His breath caught. The image showed the underground chamber, the distortion, the tunnel, everything. The photograph was dated July 1983. Daniel stared. "This proves it." The investigator nodded. "It was the only copy. Why didn't you release it?" The old man looked exhausted. "Because people died trying." Silence followed. For 43 years he had carried the evidence, living with the secret, living with the guilt. Then another sound interrupted them, a voice, coming from the corridor. "They're here." The group immediately moved. The investigator led them through a rear section of the station, a maze of storage rooms and maintenance passages. Behind them, footsteps spread through the building, searching, methodically. The people pursuing them knew the station well, too well. Eventually, they reached a locked service exit. The investigator pushed it open. Fresh air rushed inside. The forest waited beyond. For several minutes, they moved through the trees. Nobody spoke. Only after reaching a safe distance did they stop. Daniel looked back. The station stood among the forest like a dark silhouette. Then he noticed something. Vehicles. More vehicles arriving. Far more than before. The cover-up was larger than anyone imagined. Eleanor stared at the station. "They're afraid." Daniel nodded. "Yes. They've always been afraid." The investigator looked at them both. "And now they know the truth is coming." The three of them returned to town under cover of darkness. Once inside Daniel's office, they spread everything across a table. Documents, financial records, photographs, witness statements, the journal, the station photograph, decades of buried history. Daniel began organizing the evidence. The corruption alone would become a major scandal. The forged records, the missing money, the destroyed investigations, the hidden witnesses. It was enough to bring down some of the town's most respected names. Then Eleanor noticed something unusual, the original missing person photograph, the same one Daniel had found in the archive. She picked it up, studied it carefully, then frowned. "What is it?" Daniel asked. Eleanor moved closer to the desk lamp. There wasn't supposed to be anything here. She pointed toward a distant section of the image, near the edge of the frame, hidden in the background. Daniel leaned forward. At first he saw nothing. Then he noticed it. A reflection in a cafe window, tiny, barely visible, a figure standing across the street, watching Eleanor. Daniel grabbed a magnifying glass. His heart began racing. The figure wasn't a stranger. It wasn't one of the town officials. It wasn't the investigator. It was someone else entirely. Someone nobody had mentioned. Someone who should not have been there, because the face in the reflection looked exactly like Eleanor. The room became silent. Daniel stared at the photograph, then at Eleanor, then back again. The picture had been taken weeks before her disappearance, yet somehow another Eleanor appeared inside it, watching from the background, the same impossible thing Eleanor had described, seeing beyond the tunnel. Another version of herself, a copy, or something else. Nobody spoke, because all three understood the same thing at the same moment. The mystery was even bigger than they thought. And the final answer was hidden inside that photograph. The office remained silent. Daniel stared at the photograph. The magnifying glass trembled slightly in his hand. The reflection was unmistakable. A second Eleanor stood in the background, watching, waiting. The image had been taken weeks before Eleanor disappeared. Yet somehow another version of her already existed inside the photograph. Nobody spoke for several moments. Finally, the investigator sat down heavily. His face had become pale. "I was afraid of this." Daniel looked up. "You've seen something like this before?" The old man nodded, slowly, reluctantly. "Years ago." Eleanor stared at him. "What does it mean?" The investigator looked at the photograph, then at Eleanor. When people returned from beyond the tunnel, they sometimes reported seeing themselves. Eleanor nodded. "I told you I saw another version of me." The old man sighed. "Yes, but nobody ever proved it." Daniel placed the photograph on the table. Until now, the room fell silent again. The evidence was staring back at them. A photograph taken before Eleanor disappeared, containing an image that should not have existed. The investigator finally spoke. "I think the place beyond the tunnel isn't another world." Daniel listened carefully. "What is it?" The old man looked exhausted. "As best as I can understand, it's connected to time itself." Eleanor frowned. "What does that mean?" "I think people there can cross paths with different versions of their own lives." Nobody answered immediately. The explanation sounded impossible, yet it fit everything they had discovered. The tunnel, the missing years, the second Eleanor, the distorted flow of time, the impossible return. For 43 years people had searched for a simple explanation. There wasn't one. Daniel looked at the evidence covering his desk, then made his decision. The story goes public. The investigator nodded. This time there was no argument, no hesitation. The secret had survived long enough. Over the next 48 hours, Daniel worked almost without sleep. Every document was verified. Every photograph was scanned. Every witness statement was organized. Every missing record was connected. The corruption, the cover-up, the hidden evidence, the disappearance, the tunnel, everything. By the third morning, the article was ready. It became the largest investigation in the history of the newspaper. When it was published, the town changed overnight. Authorities immediately opened new inquiries. Financial crimes dating back decades were exposed. Hidden agreements surfaced. Missing records reappeared. Families demanded answers. Reporters arrived from across the country. The people who had spent years protecting the secret could no longer stop the truth. The story had become too large, too public, too well documented. For the first time in 43 years, Eleanor Hart was no longer a missing person. She was found. Days later, Daniel and Eleanor stood together near the river running through town. The sun was setting. The water reflected gold and orange light. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, Eleanor broke the silence. "Everyone I knew is gone." Daniel looked at her. She wasn't crying. The reality was simply impossible to escape. Friends, family, neighbors, entire generations, all gone, while she remained 24. The world had moved forward without her. Yet despite everything, she smiled. A small smile, a genuine one. "What happens now?" Daniel asked. Eleanor looked toward the horizon. "I start over." The answer felt right. Not perfect, but right. Some mysteries could be solved, some losses could not. A week later, the abandoned railway station was permanently sealed. Experts examined the underground chamber. The distortion was gone, completely. No trace remained. No explanation was ever discovered. The tunnel became another mystery, one that perhaps would never be fully understood. And maybe that was for the best. Some questions survive because there are no answers, only possibilities. Months passed. The town slowly adjusted. Life moved forward. The scandal faded from headlines. The investigations continued, and Eleanor began building a new life. Then one evening, Daniel received a letter. No return address, no signature. Inside was a single photograph. His heart stopped. The image showed the railway station platform. The date stamp read, July 18, 1983. Daniel examined it carefully. The platform appeared empty, at least at first. Then he noticed something near the far end. A figure, standing alone, watching the camera. Daniel's pulse quickened. It wasn't Eleanor. It wasn't the investigator. It wasn't anyone he recognized. On the back of the photograph, 4 words had been written by hand. She wasn't the only one. Daniel stared at the message, long after sunset, long after darkness filled the room, because he knew what it meant. The mystery of Eleanor Hart had ended. The truth had finally been revealed, but somewhere, hidden beyond history and time, another story was still waiting.